"You're coming with me," the mountain man said, his voice cutting through the canyon wind like a blade. The mountain man's weathered hand rested on the iron bars of the makeshift cage. Morning wind cutting through the canyon with the bite of winter still clinging to its edges. Sarah Bennett pressed herself against the far corner of the wooden prison, her torn dress catching on splinters as rough as the faces of the men who'd built it. The scent of juniper smoke and unwashed bodies hung thick in the air, mixing with the metallic taste of fear that had lived on her tongue for 3 days. "You're coming with me," the stranger said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd learned to speak softly in places where loud words brought bullets. He wore buckskin darker than old blood, and his beard held traces of gray that spoke of winters survived in the country that killed the weak. The false deputy marshal stepped forward, his stolen badge catching the early light. "She stays put, mister. Got papers say she's wanted for horse theft down in Santa Fe." Thomas Hawk, the name he'd given when he'd ridden into their camp an hour before dawn, didn't look at the papers. He studied the woman instead, noting the way her hands bore calluses from honest work, the careful mending in her dress that spoke of someone who valued what little she owned. Her eyes held fear, but not the shifty guilt of a thief. "Papers can lie," Thomas said. "Badge can be stolen. Woman's hands tell the truth." The deputy's hand drifted toward his gun. 3 other men flanked him, faces hard with the peculiar meanness that came from taking orders from a man they didn't respect. Behind them, the canyon walls rose like the ribs of some ancient beast, trapping sound and amplifying the tension that crackled between the 2 groups of men. Sarah found her voice, cracked from thirst but steady. "I never stole nothing. Was traveling to meet my sister in Tucson when they took me." Thomas nodded once, his pale blue eyes never leaving the deputy's face. "Territory law says a woman gets a hearing before a proper judge. You boys planning to provide that?" The deputy laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Judge is 3 days' ride. Might be she don't make it that far. Accidents happen on rough trails." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and something else. Wood smoke from cooking fires, the familiar smell of coffee boiling over mesquite coals. Thomas recognized the signs, even before he heard the first Apache war whoop echo off the canyon walls. His hand moved to his rifle in one smooth motion as painted warriors appeared on the rim above like shadows given deadly form. "Might be none of us make it," Thomas said quietly. The Apaches had been tracking the deputy's men for 2 days, following the smoke from their careless fires and the trail of disturbed ground they'd left in their wake. 50 warriors lined the canyon rim, their faces painted for war, rifles and bows ready. Their leader, a man Thomas recognized as Victorio's war chief Nana, raised his hand in a gesture that could mean parley or death. "Release the woman," Nana called down in accented English. "She helped my grandson when he was sick with fever. We do not forget debts of mercy." Sarah's eyes widened. She remembered the Apache boy, barely 12, burning with sickness beside a waterhole 2 weeks past. She'd shared her medicine and stayed with him through the night, asking nothing in return but safe passage for her wagon. The deputy's face had gone the color of old bone. His men shifted nervously, counting odds that would see them all dead before the sun climbed another hand's width. "This ain't your concern, Apache. Woman's a criminal." Thomas stepped between the deputy and the cage. His movement was deliberate, placing himself in the line of fire from both groups. "Boys telling the truth about the medicine?" Nana's weathered face creased in what might have been approval. White medicine woman sat with my blood when others would have passed by. This is known. Then she's under my protection, Thomas said. He pulled a worn leather folder from his coat and showed its contents to the deputy. Thomas Hawk, Federal Marshal, Denver District. Those papers you're waving are forgeries, and that badge belongs to Deputy Marshal Carson, who was found shot dead outside Lordsburg last month. The deputy's hand closed fully on his gun butt. Prove it. Thomas smiled, the expression holding all the warmth of a winter grave. Already did. Nana's word is worth more than your forged paper. Woman shows mercy to Apache children. She's no horse thief. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 50 Apache warriors held their position on the rim, while 4 desperate men weighed their chances in the bottom of a box canyon. Sarah pressed against the bars of her cage, hope warring with terror as she realized her fate balanced on the edge of a knife. The deputy made his choice with the sudden desperation of a cornered animal. His gun cleared leather just as Thomas dove sideways, rolling behind a scatter of boulders as bullets spanged off stone. The canyon erupted in echoes as rifles barked from above and below. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the false deputy's men lay still in the dust. The deputy himself sat propped against a wagon wheel, clutching his shoulder while blood seeped between his fingers. His stolen badge lay in the dirt beside him, its false authority scattered like his broken plans. Thomas rose from cover, his rifle trained on the surviving man. Key to the cage. The deputy's good hand shook as he reached into his pocket and tossed the iron key toward the wooden prison. It landed in the dust near Sarah's cage with a sound like deliverance. Nana climbed down from the rim with the fluid grace of a man half his age, his warriors following like shadows. He approached Sarah's cage as Thomas unlocked it, his dark eyes studying her face with the intensity of a man reading sign on a difficult trail. "You gave medicine to my grandson without thought of reward," Nana said. "This is the way of a person with good heart." Sarah stepped from the cage on unsteady legs, her hand briefly touching Thomas's arm for support. The boy was sick. Anyone would have helped. Many passed by. Nana said simply, "You stopped." Thomas helped steady her, noting how she leaned into his strength without shame. Her courage impressed him. Not the foolish bravery of someone who didn't understand danger, but the steady resolve of a woman who'd found herself in hell and refused to break. "We'll see you safe to Tucson," he told her. "Got business there myself with the territorial judge. These men won't trouble you again." The wounded deputy struggled to his feet, hatred burning in his eyes despite his defeat. "This ain't finished, Marshal. Got friends who won't take kindly to interference." Nana stepped close to the man, his presence carrying the weight of desert storms and old justice. "You take Apache hospitality and twist it to cruelty. You steal honor from the dead." He gestured toward the scattered badges and papers. "My people know the difference between law and lawlessness. You are lawless." The old chief turned to Thomas with something approaching respect. "You put yourself between bullets and innocence. This is remembered." Thomas nodded acknowledgement, understanding the value of Apache friendship in country, where such alliances could mean the difference between life and death. "Your grandson? He recovered from the fever?" "He lives. He will carry the story of the white medicine woman who showed mercy when mercy was dangerous. Stories like these matter when our peoples stand at the edge of war or peace. Sarah listened to the exchange with growing understanding of how close she'd come to death, and how the simple act of helping a sick child had saved her life. The weight of consequence and kindness intertwined in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. They made camp that evening at a waterhole 10 miles from the canyon, the Apache warriors melting away into the desert, like smoke as quietly as they'd appeared. Thomas had bound the deputy's wound with professional competence before securing him for transport to the territorial capital. The man would face justice for his crimes, but he would live to see it. Sarah sat by their small fire, working to repair the worst of the tears in her dress with a needle and thread Thomas had provided from his saddlebags. The familiar work steadied her hands and gave her mind something to focus on beyond the violence she'd witnessed. "You carry a sewing kit," she observed, glancing up at the mountain man who sat cleaning his rifle with methodical care. "Country teaches a man to carry what he might need," Thomas replied. "Thread mends more than clothes, mends tack, patches wounds, fixes things that matter." The firelight played across his weathered features, revealing scars that spoke of hard living and harder choices. Sarah found herself studying his hands as he worked. Capable hands, scarred but gentle in their movements. Hands that could kill or heal depending on what the moment demanded. "That badge of yours," she said quietly. "It's real?" Thomas paused in his cleaning, meeting her eyes across the fire. "Real as anything gets out here. Been carrying federal law through this territory for 6 years. Long enough to tell the difference between justice and revenge, between law and the men who abuse it. Why did you come for me? Could have ridden past like the others." The question hung between them like smoke from the dying fire. Thomas resumed his methodical cleaning, considering his words with the care of a man who'd learned that truth could be as dangerous as lies in the wrong circumstances. "Had a sister once," he said finally, "taken by men who figured her family couldn't protect her. By the time I found her, she was dead. Sometimes a man gets a chance to balance the scales, prevent the same wrong from happening again." Sarah's needle stilled in her work. "I'm sorry. Long time passed. But a man carries his debts, both the ones owed to him and the ones he owes. Today I paid one I'd been carrying too long." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned lower, the desert night settling around them with its peculiar peace. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack, the sound lonely and wild and free. Thomas added another piece of mesquite to the flames, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-scattered sky. "Your sister in Tucson," he said. "She expecting you?" Sarah nodded, folding her mended dress with careful hands. "Mary's husband runs a freight business there. They offered me work keeping books, a chance to start over after." She trailed off, leaving whatever sorrow had driven her west unspoken. Thomas understood the weight of unfinished sentences, the stories that people carried inside like half-healed wounds. The frontier was full of folks running from something, seeking the kind of new beginning that only came with distance and determination. "Good work keeping books," he said. "Honest work." "Honest work is all I've ever known," Sarah replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. "Whatever that false deputy claimed, I never took what wasn't mine. Nana's word would have been enough, but your hands told the same story. Working hands, healing hands, not thief's hands." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. She studied his profile in the flickering light, noting the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, even in casual conversation. A man always alert, always ready. The kind of man who'd survived by learning to read danger in the turn of a leaf or the shift of a shadow. What will happen to him? She nodded toward where the wounded deputy lay secured near their horses. Trial in Prescott. Judge Hawthorne's fair but firm. Man like that, carrying stolen badge, impersonating federal law, he'll face hard time. Maybe the rope, depending on what other crimes come to light. Sarah shivered despite the fire's warmth. He would have killed me. Eventually. Men like that don't leave witnesses to their schemes. You were lucky the Apaches remembered your kindness. Lucky you came when you did. Thomas poked at the fire with a stick, sending up another shower of sparks. Wasn't luck. Been tracking that bunch for a week. They hit a stage outside Silver City, killed the driver and guard. When I heard they'd taken a woman prisoner, knew I had to move fast. The revelation settled between them with the weight of providence. Sarah realized how many small chances had aligned to save her life. The sick Apache boy, Thomas's relentless pursuit of justice, the timing that had brought them all together in that box canyon. The boy you mentioned, she said quietly. Your sister. What was her name? Elizabeth. She was 16. Wanted to be a teacher, help children learn their letters. His voice carried the worn grief of old pain, carefully controlled but never forgotten. She'd have liked what you did for that Apache child. Would have done the same. Sarah reached across the small space between them and briefly touched his hand. The gesture was simple, wordless, but it carried understanding and shared sorrow for the violence that had shaped both their lives. Thomas didn't pull away from the contact. Her hand was warm, calloused from work, but gentle in its touch. It had been years since he'd felt such uncomplicated human kindness. The sort of connection that reminded him why he'd chosen to carry a badge in country where law was often just a word carved on a tombstone. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. Thank me when we get you safe to your sister. But they both knew the thanks had already been given and received in ways that went deeper than words. Something had passed between them in the sharing of old pain and present courage, a recognition of kindred spirits shaped by loss but not broken by it. The fire burned down to coals as they prepared for sleep, Thomas arranging his bedroll where he could watch both their prisoner and the surrounding desert. Sarah settled near the dying warmth, her dress draped over a nearby rock to finish drying after her repairs. Thomas, she said softly as he settled into his blankets. That Apache chief, Nana, he knew you. We've crossed paths. Territory's big, but the men who try to keep peace in it are few. Apache leaders know which lawmen can be trusted, which ones keep their word. And you keep yours. It wasn't a question, but Thomas answered anyway. Man's word is all he really owns out here. Break it once, might as well burn your badge and find other work. Sarah smiled in the darkness, understanding something fundamental about the man who'd risked his life for a stranger. In a land where violence and deception seemed to rule, she'd found someone who still believed in the simple power of honor and duty. They reached Tucson 3 days later, the false deputy secured in the town jail pending transport to Prescott for trial. Sarah's reunion with her sister Mary was tearful and joyous, the freight office filled with questions and explanations, and the particular relief that comes when family feared lost is restored. Thomas stood in the doorway watching the sisters embrace, his official duty complete but reluctant to leave. Something about Sarah Bennett had worked its way under his skin during their journey together. a combination of courage and kindness that reminded him why he'd chosen to serve law instead of profit in a territory where both were scarce commodities. Mary Turner was a smaller, rounder version of her sister, her face bearing the weathered contentment of a woman who'd found her place in hard country. Her husband James appeared from the back office, a solidly built man with a practical air of someone who made his living moving goods through dangerous territory. "Marshal Hawk," James said, extending a calloused hand. "Can't thank you enough for bringing Sarah home safe." Thomas shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze of a man who understood the value of honest dealing. "Your sister-in-law's got steel in her spine. She'd have found a way to survive, even without help." "Still," Mary interjected, wiping tears from her eyes, "you took risks for a stranger. That means something." Sarah stepped forward, her hands working nervously at the fabric of her dress. The simple blue calico had been mended and cleaned during their journey, but it still bore the marks of her ordeal. Despite everything she'd endured, her eyes held clear gratitude and something deeper, a recognition that their shared experience had forged a connection neither of them fully understood. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into the small bundle of possessions she'd carried from the canyon. She withdrew a small wooden carving, no bigger than her palm, depicting a horse in full gallop. Thomas accepted the carving, surprised by its weight and the intricate detail of its craftsmanship. The wood had been polished smooth by years of handling, and the horse seemed to capture motion in stillness, freedom in form. "My father made it for me when I was 12, Sarah explained. "Said it would remind me that sometimes you have to run to be free. Sometimes you have to stand and fight. I want you to have it. Can't take something that means so much to you. It means more to me that you have it. Every time you look at it, remember that some things are worth protecting. Some people are worth saving." Thomas closed his fingers around the small carving, feeling its smooth warmth against his palm. The gift was more than wood and craftsmanship. It was trust given freely, gratitude made tangible, and a reminder that his chosen path served purposes larger than law and duty. "I'll treasure it," he said simply. Mary stepped forward with the practical efficiency of a woman accustomed to managing details. "Marshal, we're in your debt. Anything we can do, supplies for your travels, information about routes or weather, you only need ask. Appreciate that. Territory needs more folks like you, building something lasting instead of just taking what they can grab." James nodded toward his office. "Coffee's always hot, and our door's always open to honest law. Not enough of either in this country." Thomas tucked the carved horse into his vest pocket, where it settled against his chest like a talisman. Through the office window, he could see the bustling activity of Tucson's main street. Freight wagons loading supplies, mounted men heading out to distant ranches, women shopping for necessities that had traveled hundreds of miles to reach this isolated outpost of civilization. "I'll be riding back through in a month or two," he said, the words spoken before he'd fully considered them. "Have to testify at that deputy's trial." Sarah's face brightened at the prospect. "We'll be here. I'll be working the books, helping Mary and James build their business." "Good. Honest work in good company. That's worth more than most folks realize." He touched his hat brim in farewell, a gesture both formal and intimate. Sarah stepped forward impulsively, rising on her toes to kiss his weathered cheek with the brief, fierce affection of someone who looked death in the face and learned to value life in all its forms. "Ride safe, Marshal Thomas Hawk," she whispered. The territory's a better place with you in it. Thomas felt the warmth of her lips against his skin long after she'd stepped back. He nodded to the Turner family, settled his hat more firmly on his head, and walked out into the bright desert sunlight. His horse waited at the hitching rail, a sturdy bay gelding that had carried him through 6 years of territorial service. Thomas checked his gear with automatic precision, rifle secured, ammunition dry, water barrels full. The habits of survival had become second nature, but today they felt less like preparation for solitude and more like the rituals of a man with reasons to return. As he swung into the saddle, Thomas felt the small wooden horse press against his chest. The carving would travel with him through whatever dangers lay ahead, a reminder of courage found in unlikely places and connections forged in the crucible of shared peril. Behind him, the Turner Freight Office represented something rare in territorial Arizona. A family business built on trust and hard work. A small island of stability in a sea of change. Sarah Bennett had found her place there. But Thomas knew their story wasn't finished. Some debts took time to pay. Some connections needed seasons to strengthen into something lasting. The desert stretched ahead of him, vast and unforgiving and beautiful in its harsh honesty. Somewhere out there, other wrongs needed righting. Other innocence needed protecting. The badge in his pocket carried the weight of federal authority. But the wooden horse over his heart carried something more precious. The knowledge that his choices mattered, that justice served with mercy could build bridges between peoples who'd known mostly war. Thomas Hawk rode north toward whatever challenge waited beyond the horizon, carrying law and hope in equal measure, through a territory learning the difference between civilization and mere survival. Behind him, Sarah Bennett began her new life with healing hands and a grateful heart, knowing that sometimes salvation came in the form of a weathered mountain man who learned that true strength lay in standing between the innocent and those who would do them harm. The sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and red that would have inspired poets if poets had been hardy enough to survive such country. Instead, it fell to ordinary people, marshals and merchants, Apache chiefs and determined women, to write the territory's story in acts of courage and kindness that mattered more than all the gold hidden in its mountains. Don't forget to subscribe and consider giving a like to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.